Welcome everybody to our latest edition of Behrend Talks. And today we have something new for us. We have multiple guests, and we're talking about a very important topic, and that is our plans for return to campus this fall. And before I introduce our guests, I'd like to just give a little background. I think as many may know, this is a large discussion around the United States right now in terms of how do our universities do they come back to campus for face-to-face instruction? And if you've been watching, Penn State University is among those universities that has announced, it was last month, that we are returning to campus for a residential experience. And here at Penn State Behrend, we are actively planning to do so. So today, my guests are all part of that back to campus team, and they have been working very diligently for the last several months to answer many difficult questions due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So today we have a conversation on that process and the changes. I wanted to get to, all of the issues that are involved. What are the changes people can expect to see on campus this fall? And I have 4 guests, so let me start and introduce them all. Ken Miller is the Director of Administration and Student Affairs. Emily Cassano is an Assistant Teaching Professor in Theater, Music, and Visual Arts. And she is also chair of our Faculty Senate and Faculty Council. Dr. Marty Kociolek is director of the School of Science, and Michelle Hartmann, director of Community and Workforce Programs. So all welcome here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's, like I say, it's great to have you. And, through this pandemic, we've been recording remotely. We keep trying new things. So this is the first podcast we have with 4 guests. And, I want to start out though with this discussion, and, it's important. As I said, campuses across the country have been struggling with this. Maybe Ken, you start on this one. How did, Penn State University, arrive at this decision? Explain to me a little bit about that process.
Well, I think the university had to very carefully consider many variables with the return to campus. And one of the things that I think makes Penn State such a unique institution is its reach across Pennsylvania. So it wasn't as if the Board of Trustees was making a decision for one campus in Center County. So that was a measured approach that looked at all the locations, the 23 locations of the university, to make sure that we could provide students with the Penn State quality education that they expect in an environment that will mitigate risk to students, faculty, staff, and visitors to the university.
Yeah, I would add, I think, and we'll get into it, there's a team here working, there are teams across the university. So we looked at everything from public health issues to all of the protocols that you need to have in place. And the truth is, like all of us, we're still working through a number of those. So I also want to, the thing that strikes me about this is the decision has so many constituents. I think that's what makes it so hard, is our communities would like to see us back. They have an economic stake in this. We have to mitigate the risk, as you said, for our faculty and staff and our students. And, but I think it's an important one for the country, and everyone is watching. All eyes are on us on this one. Do you feel that pressure as a committee? I mean, have you discussed that in your deliberations?
Well, I don't know that we've felt that pressure until now. But I do think there is an enormous responsibility that goes along with this. The decision to return really impacts every facet of campus life, as well as facets off campus, because the stakeholders have families, and they come from different communities, and they have different responsibilities. So it's really not a one-size-fits-all. And I think the real challenge to this, developing this return plan, is to look at many multiple perspectives on issues that or challenges that in some cases during normal times we might take for granted. So I do think, there's a sense of we want to be sure we don't miss anything. We want to be sure we're anticipating as many conditions or scenarios or needs that we can. And I think we're achieving that because we're involving a lot of people in this process.
That leads right into my next question. Who's on the team? Are there subgroups and what's the representation and how are you operating?
Well, we formed our steering committee, our coordinating committee, and we were really trying to consider the big pieces of the campus operation. And first and foremost was instruction. So what are the classrooms going to look like? How are the faculty going to teach in potentially multiple modalities? So it was important that we were looking at the instruction component of the operation. Then we looked at the research function, and being a Research One institution, research plays a vital role to Penn State and plays an important role at Penn State Behrend. So that was an area that we needed to focus on in the near term as we were planning to return to campus, so faculty could continue their laboratory-based research. There's also research that's being conducted in the field. So, one might think of research as just one aspect, one laboratory, but really there are multiple layers to the research enterprise. Then we took the next step towards operations and outreach. So the day-to-day operations of the campus, what are the students doing? What are the traffic patterns on campus? How are we going to maintain social distancing? How are we going to be sure we're cleaning the campus environment according to a variety of standards? And then finally, a big component for us on campus is athletics. And with the number of student athletes, our coaches, our athletic training facilities, not to mention the families and the visitors who were in the stands watching the games, that was an important piece for us. So the four main committees have been looking at big pieces of the operation, and I think they would agree that it has grown then from what we had originally thought each committee would be looking at.
As I say, there's a playbook here. And I think it's known, so to speak, number of organizations that are advising us, from CDC to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. They've told us what we need to do, but that doesn't mean it's easy to do. And one of the ones that is always at the top of the list is testing and contact tracing. And boy, when I talk to people generally, they don't always understand what the importance of that is. And how does it work? So, all of you, can you, what are we doing in those regards? So testing, contact tracing, and quarantining.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for testing, that has been a priority for us. We are in the process of purchasing a new testing equipment that will test for COVID-19. And we will have results in 45 minutes. So it's an immediate test with a high degree of accuracy and one that we will be able to do locally. And we are working with the Erie County Department of Health in terms of testing there. There are testing resources in the community. Nationwide, there's a shortage of the cartridges that are used for the COVID testing. So if we do not have that equipment operational as we begin the academic year, we'll still be relying on our partners in the community for testing. Mm-hmm. That's very important to us. I think in terms of contact tracing, we actually have a threefold plan for contact tracing. The first is, again, working with the Erie County Department of Health. They have increased their staffing to provide contact tracing, and where if a student or a member of our community tests positive, then that team would work with that student and others to kind of backward trace their contacts and where they've been. And there's a structured process to this that really helps guide the person who's tested positive, guide them back through their activities. So the Department of Health will be working with them. There's also a university-wide contact tracing system that is being developed now that will be utilized across the university, and will have participation from our Health and Wellness Center as well as our Student Affairs Unit that will assist in that contact tracing. And then we've also, we have probably a dozen or so of our staff who have already gone through contact tracing training through the Johns Hopkins training program as well as CDC training. So when we have cases, and we don't believe it's a matter of if, it is a matter of when, we want to be able to trace that person's activities in order to notify folks that they were exposed to someone who has tested positive for COVID-19.
So is this available to faculty, students, staff? So anybody on campus can be tested?
Yes. So if a person isn't feeling well, if they're displaying a fever, if they are notified, they may have been exposed prior to arrival back to campus, we would be able to accommodate testing for them.
Let me switch to Emily and direct this question to Emily. So when we look at returning to campus, and we see it in the news every day, some faculty are comfortable and they're looking forward to getting back and being in the classroom, but some of them have really important concerns about their own health, the health of family members and the like. And how are we working through that process of how they end up in the classroom, and how do faculty work through this in terms of delivering their courses this fall?
So we've asked all faculty members to express their desire, whether it is to teach remotely or in person, to their their program chairs, and then the program chairs report back to the school directors. I think the university has made it very clear that it is okay to say, listen, I'm not comfortable and I'd rather, protect myself or protect the people in my house and teach remotely. And so I've tried to make sure that point has been conveyed across the campus so that people don't feel like they're being pressured to come back to campus. People like me, I prefer to be in front of people. So, I'm glad that there's going to be protections in place as well for the people that do want to teach in person, like myself.
Yeah, and we really want to get into that discussion of protections. So I think that's one of the things that really is good. We've provided a very flexible approach. And, maybe Marty, you're working through, what's the mix look like? So explain to people how are we going to have classes this fall? Is it face to face? We talk about remote. We talk about online. What are these different options? Maybe the two of you can talk through what the options are and how this process is working out.
Sure. Well, we have to evaluate all of our courses on a number of different levels, based on faculty concerns and needs, based on pedagogical considerations, based on space, based on classrooms, which needs to be socially distant, based on technology, which different classrooms are set up in different ways, and the university and college are working through different types of technology, new technology they can bring into the classrooms to help that delivery mode. So it's our goal to look at all of these and really place all of the courses into three different modes. As much as we can, we would like to get the students face-to-face in a full in-person mode. Now, that might not always be possible based on some of the constraints that I just talked about. And then we may move from that into a mixed mode, which means we can put students in a classroom for a period of time in a class, but then also add to that content in a remote sense, to put stuff online either in a synchronous or asynchronous way. But then also to accommodate faculty who have concerns about being in the classroom, We will be putting a number of classes then completely remote. Same way we're accommodating for students who might not want to be on campus or may want to limit their time on campus. We will be offering a certain amount of remote courses as well. So it's going to be a real mix, and that mix is really based on all those different factors. At this point, early, it'll be a solid mix, I think, across all different modes. So.
All right. And how is it turning out so far? We're in the process, but do you have any, just rule of thumb estimate about how, what percentage could people expect when they come to campus this fall of their time in a traditional classroom?
I think if we look at it in a couple of different ways, and keep in mind all of our schools are somewhat different when we start to look at it. So for the truly remote courses, what I'm seeing at this point with a lot of the courses that are coming online, we may be in the 20% to 25% range of truly remote courses, which means then we have 75 to 80% of our courses are going to have some in-person component. Like I said, it's going to be a mix between entirely in-person and then this mixed mode, which will be partially in-person at this point. How those two divide up, just off the top of my head and kind of looking at what we've got so far, I'd say we'll be in the ballpark of 35 to 40% truly in-person courses, and then the rest would fall into that mixed mode.
So then the total really then becomes more like 50, 60% or something, and it's to be determined. But the reality is, once you start to work through the social distancing, you have to keep people 6 feet apart, your classrooms become a lot smaller. In fact, you lose about 2/3 of your capacity right off the top. And I thought we would talk a bit about that. But before we do, I wanted to go back to Emily for a minute. And one of the other issues that is really important in the classroom and on campus is this idea, and it's become very political, is masking. People need to wear a mask. What is our approach here in terms of our expectations for our students on campus, and particularly in the classroom where they're there with faculty members?
So we are expecting both faculty and students and all staff members to wear masks. At this point, I think we're seeing this throughout the country where it's simply it's a consideration for other people. And so it will be sort of worked into how the students, just as they normally would be expected to come to class and to, behave appropriately during class, they'll be expected to wear the masks there too. And I mean, we understand that it's not ideal. It's not necessarily comfortable for everyone, but it is necessary to keep everyone safe and to keep everyone healthy. And it's part of why we're able to go back into in-person learning, which I know a lot of the students expressed that that's what they wanted.
Yeah, some have concerns as well, but the great majority want to come back. I think you made a really good point. This really is about all of us really doing our part to help others. And by wearing a mask, you are protecting others. And the science is really clear now. If everyone's wearing a mask, the risk of transmission of this disease goes way, way down. So people, they need, and that's the expectation. And if they don't wear them, I will say, they shouldn't expect to come back to campus on this fall, because that is our expectation, is not only that you're wearing a mask in the classroom, but when you're walking across campus, when you're in the hallways, you're wearing a mask.
It's just a small thing to ask in order to sort of return to a semblance of normal life. And I think that's just something everyone is going to have to take into consideration when we return to campus, that it's going to, I hate to use the term the new normal, but to use the term the new normal, it's going to have to become a part of that in order for us to kind of get back into the swing of things.
And what I found is I've been trying different masks like all of us. So you have to find the right one that works for you. And, just wear it for a few hours once in a while. And I have found in the last week or two that you get accustomed to it, and it just becomes part of your normal day. So we all start to do that. We can really stop the transmission of this. Michelle, I wanted to switch to you, Michelle Hartmann. We haven't heard from you yet. You're overseeing, and working on the subgroup or the team that's looking at how we set up the campus. and how do we maintain social distancing? So could you tell us a bit, what's campus going to look like this fall? What are the changes that are going to happen in our classrooms, our hallways, our dining halls? I know there's a lot to that. So go ahead, Michelle.
Sure, and it definitely will look different. As you mentioned earlier, the classrooms will be at a 30 to 50% occupancy rate. There will be signs all over campus with reminders and social distancing signs on the floors, in the labs, in the classrooms. We may not be able to remove all of the furniture in the classrooms, but there will be stickers to identify where to sit to maintain that distance. We'll have hand sanitizers at each building, within school offices, and at water fountains. We're installing wall mounts with disinfectant wipes in the general purpose classrooms. All lounges and spaces and common areas will be reconfigured to appropriate social distancing feet. And in smaller spaces, some places will even have occupancy signs. So the campus is going to look a lot different.
So let's take some areas. So as we said, the classrooms will be set up differently, but what about residence halls? The students are coming back and they're going to be in the residence halls. Are there limits there? How do we anticipate that process will work?
Sure. Well, I think with the residence halls, our focus initially is going to be trying to limit those communities to just the residents of the building. And the idea being that we'll be bringing groups of students together from a lot of different areas and then bringing them into their rooms. So students in the public areas of the residence halls, so the hallways, the lounges, will still be required to wear a mask, but not in their individual room. And we will have the directional signage. We will have limits in the lounge spaces. And the challenge, I think, for us is going to be building community in a somewhat dispersed environment that, for students who choose to live on campus, it is really a terrific opportunity to bring them together and to, enjoy that shared experience of being a student, a new student. You're all going through some of the same challenges of transitioning to college. And the challenge there, I think, is going to be doing that 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. And how do we look at building shared experiences both online as well as in person, and being creative and finding ways to do that in a socially responsible manner. I think the thing we have going for us, though, is that students are very comfortable with technology. And our staff have been working very hard to build groups, whether that's text groups, whether it's utilizing the Behrend Sync, which is a student organization software that we use, is to find ways to connect students digitally that helps build that community. So I think that's going to be a particular challenge in the residence halls. Our housing and food services management has a fantastic plan for cleanliness, for schedules and cleaning. We're also looking at a staged arrival where students will reserve a time when they will move into campus. We're still going to assist them to get into campus. We know that's a huge transition. So it's a real balance for us, I think, to connect students, to make sure they know they're welcome, but that we're also having that socially responsible environment.
We do anticipate, too, and it's just like our instructional modes of delivery we talked about. There will be student clubs and organizations. They'll be operating. Some of it will be face-to-face. Some of it will be remote. But that's the expectation.
Absolutely. And we also want to be sure that our students who are only participating in classes virtually feel like they're a part of the community as well. And that's one of the advantages we have of working with students who are so comfortable with technology. When we made the transition in March, our student organizations continued to meet online, and they held virtual events. And as we're working with them, as we move into the fall, we're working with them to help incorporate a virtual component to some of the events that they're doing for students who would not feel comfortable being there in person, or faculty staff who may not feel comfortable being there in person. So instead of just being an add-on, we're putting it into the center of the planning for club and organization events.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to understand. I wanted to switch back to the classroom experience, the teaching experience. So this is directed at you, Emily and Marty. And let me just start, at the start of this pandemic, which now seems like it was ages ago, we made this massive transition really within several days. We moved nearly 1,200 classes and labs online within about a 5-day period. We didn't miss a single day of classes. And I just wanted, your perspective on that was hard. It was difficult. Our faculty, our staff, our students all responded tremendously well. But have our faculty learned new things about teaching through that process and delivering in a different manner than originally they have? What are the things that you're hearing out there?
We certainly, and you mentioned that the spring 2020 semester came with a number of challenges. First, there was the movement to the remote, which happened immediately following spring break. So like you said, 4 or 5 days kind of warning there. What we also don't want to forget in there is almost a week later then we moved off campus. We then asked faculty then to make a second transition to home and start to teach from a completely different environment. So under those circumstances, the faculty performed amazingly well, maintaining a continuity of instruction, delivering what we expected as a high-quality education in modes they were completely unfamiliar with. So it was a steep learning curve, but like you said, they all did a really fantastic job. I believe faculty learned a lot in that experience. They were exposed to new teaching methods that they were unfamiliar with. And I expect that they will build and improve on those skills, no matter what teaching mode they use this fall. If they are moving into a mixed or remote type mode for the fall, I think that connection is more apparent. They can build on things that they've already learned. But I also know a number of faculty who may be moving back to in-person instruction this fall, but said they're going to bring things they learned back from their remote instruction and incorporate it and enrich their in-person instruction with it. I think that the thing we all have to remember too is incorporating some of that remote and some of that online instruction is important for everyone, because just like we had a pivot last spring, faculty need to be ready to be able to maybe pivot modes again as we go into the fall and even thinking ahead into the spring. We're going to be at this same game really for the next academic year. So if faculty have that in their minds, what they did last semester, and kind of think of ahead as to what they might do if we do have to move, I think that's going to be important.
Emily, your thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Marty, I totally agree. And I feel as if not only did we learn, maybe some new technical skills or, a different way of delivering something that'll work for our classes moving forward, but I think on both sides, those students and faculty, we learned a great deal about compassion and patience. And I think, we realized, we could say to each other, listen, such and such is happening. My internet isn't working. One of my family members got sick. Can we just kind of change things? And I know for me, I was constantly in contact with students and we were just kind of sharing those things with each other. Hey, could you guys be a little patient with me? Taking acting online is taking me a little longer than, taking my other 2 classes. So, and I think it was a great way to kind of make a deeper connection between students and faculty members. And I think we will definitely have to keep that compassion and patience going as we move forward, because we just don't know what will happen.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Compassion and patience and persistence, and we'll all get through this. There's still a long way to go. But Emily, I wanted to follow up too. You teach theater in our studio theater. It's a small space to begin with. What's your plan for this fall?
So the 3 more lecture-based courses I teach, we're not going to meet in there. Typically the only time we do meet in there for a class is for an acting class. But we won't have to tackle that until next semester. As far as the fall production goes, which is also a course, that students can take for credit, right now it's still up in the air. We have been, really blessed with the fact, that Brian Streeter, our athletic director, has offered us, Erie Hall if we do decide to do some sort of in-person or maybe some sort of blended performance, because Erie Hall is much larger than the studio theater. I think if you were to take the studio theater and cut it in half or do social distancing, we'd maybe be able to fit 5 audience members and 5 actors. But so that's definitely an option. I mean, obviously, ideally, we would love to continue the work on our musical production of Carrie that we had started in the spring and never got to finish. But I am also prepared that if that can't happen, that we will attempt to do something virtually. Probably not a musical, because music does pose a little bit more of a problem than an actual play. So it would probably be more of just what we would call a straight play. And then we'll tackle that, using Zoom or a different platform.
Well, it sounds as though you've got at least the different options well in hand. And it's just such a difficult thing to know right now as to how you would do something like that.
It is. And I was really lucky. There's a lot of other people in the same boat, and within days of, sort of the United States getting shut down, all of these groups had popped up on Facebook and other social media platforms talking about how do we teach such an interactive course, and how do we do these type of performances if we can't be together. So luckily, we've all been working together and trying to figure that stuff out.
Ken, I wanted to switch to one more subject before we finish up here, and that's athletics. Everyone's asking about athletics. We've obviously got a number of NCAA Division III sports. What's that look like this fall?
Well, it's going to look different. We belong to the Allegheny Mountain Collegiate Conference, and the AMCC is currently looking at its guidelines for games and throughout the year. That hasn't been settled, but what we know will likely be the outcome will be that if there are teams that have athletes who test positive, or their institutions do not feel comfortable playing that game, then there will be a no penalty opt out for that team. So if if we're going to host a soccer tournament on Labor Day weekend, which we normally do, and one of our opponents decides they don't feel comfortable playing that, then that would not hurt them in terms of the conference. So it's taken a lot of preparation. Our coaches are working hard on our practice environments. Our athletic trainers have been looking at our athletic training facilities and making sure that students are safe when they're being treated. I think a real challenge is in our workout facilities. The Yagaman Fitness Room it's not the largest facility. In fact, we are knee deep in planning for a new $26 million recreation center on campus. And I wish we had that now, because it would help us in our social distancing. Mm-hmm. But it'll be a real challenge, I think, for students who want to use the weight room, who want to use cardio machines. We're going to monitor the occupancy of that space. We'll do that with card swipe technology, but as well as our indoor track and overall use of our athletic facilities. I do think our coaches, our players are very excited to come back. Not a single one of our first-year student recruits has opted out. They all want to come back. They all want to be here. They're excited to be at Penn State Behrend. They're excited to be on their athletic teams. And that's really showing through in their commitment to return.
Yeah, and I must say, I ask you a question of which somewhat I'm involved in those discussions with our athletic conference. And what I'm really pleased to see is, everyone is working through a lot of detail in terms of the regulations they have in their different states and the like, but all have agreed to, very clear sharing of what their practices are, very clear sharing if they have COVID cases so that we all know, and a commitment to following the social distancing or the physical distancing guidelines. And you can do it, and it requires, students won't be wearing masks, for example, while they're in competition, but the students, for example, on the sidelines will be, and they'll be, required to physically distance. So there are ways to make this happen. We will see how it progresses, and we will adapt as necessary. And with that, though, I will say we're just about at the end of our time here, but I want to give any of you, is there anything I missed today or anything particularly important that you wanted to add before we close the show?
Well, I would like to add that, it's going to be a different experience for our students and our faculty and our staff and visitors to the campus. But I think they can feel confident in the steps that we're taking to create an environment that is safe for one another. There won't be a person who walks on this campus who won't understand what the expectations are of them. Our hope is that by returning to campus, they're going to abide by those expectations, but they will be made very clear. And the other thing I would like to add is that to our folks, our fellow guests here today, is that this is an enormous amount of work on top of our already busy schedules. And, my hat's off to Marty and Michelle, Emily, Sean Limerick, Ivor Knight, folks that are chairing these larger groups and have just done a fantastic job in getting us to where we are and then getting us across the finish line come August.
Ken, extremely well said. I don't think I have anything else to add. I think that's a great way to end the show. I'm Chancellor Ralph Ford. You are listening to Behrend Talks, and my guests today have been Ken Miller, Emily Cassano, Michelle Hartmann, and Marty Kociolek. I want to thank you and all the members of the committee. You've been working very hard on return to campus. This has been a very informative discussion. Thank you. Have a great day.